A girl traded for whiskey. A man who paid the price, but not for the reason you think. What he found inside that barrel would change his life forever. And hers. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The dust swirled across the rutted dirt road as Elijah Morgan guided his wagon into the small frontier town of Redemption Creek. The summer of 1876 had been unforgiving, and the parched landscape reflected the harshness of life in the American West. At 42, Elijah's weathered face told the story of a man who had seen his share of hardship, but his eyes still held a quiet determination that had carried him through the years since losing his wife to fever. As the wagon creaked to a halt outside Dawson's General Store, Elijah adjusted his worn hat and surveyed the dusty main street. He needed supplies before heading back to his modest homestead 10 miles outside of town. The last year had been hard. Drought had stunted his crops, and loneliness had become his constant companion. "Afternoon, Mr. Morgan," called Samuel Dawson from the porch of his store. "Been a while since we've seen you in town." Elijah nodded, stepping down from the wagon. "Harvest hasn't been kind this year, Sam. Just need the essentials today." Inside the dimly lit store, the familiar scent of leather, tobacco, and coffee beans filled the air. Elijah methodically gathered his supplies: flour, coffee, ammunition, and a few other necessities. As he approached the counter, a commotion outside caught his attention. "That's some prime merchandise today, gentlemen," a boisterous voice announced, fresh from the Tennessee hills. Curious, Elijah stepped onto the porch, where he found a crowd gathering around a flamboyantly dressed trader named Clayton Reeves, a notorious figure known for dealing in whatever turned a profit, often of questionable origin. Today, Reeves had several barrels displayed from his wagon. "Finest whiskey this side of the Mississippi," Reeves proclaimed, patting one of the oak barrels. "Smooth enough to make a preacher forget his sermon." The crowd chuckled appreciatively. Elijah was about to return to his shopping when Reeves gestured toward a smaller barrel set apart from the others. "And I've got something special for the right buyer," he said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Something worth more than gold to a man living alone on the frontier." The crowd murmured with interest as Reeves continued his pitch. Elijah felt a sense of unease as the trader went on about a special arrangement for someone in need of help around the homestead. Years of frontier living had taught Elijah to recognize the language of unsavory transactions. As the crowd dispersed, some men purchasing whiskey and others wandering back to their business, Elijah approached Reeves. "What exactly are you selling in that small barrel?" he demanded, his voice low and firm. Reeves sized him up with calculating eyes. "A man living alone, like yourself, could be just what you need." He lowered his voice. "Young girl. 14, maybe 15. Father traded her for 3 barrels of whiskey. Said he had too many mouths to feed anyway." Elijah's stomach turned. "You're selling a child? Call it what you want," Reeves shrugged. "I call it business. She's yours for $50. That's a bargain considering what she saved you in hired help." Anger surged through Elijah, but he maintained his composure. He'd heard of such dealings. Desperate families in remote areas sometimes made unconscionable choices, and unscrupulous men like Reeves profited from human misery. "Show me," Elijah said, his mind racing. Reeves grinned, misreading Elijah's intention, and led him to the small barrel. The trader tapped on the wood. "Come on out, girl. Got a potential buyer." Slowly, the barrel's top moved, and a thin arm emerged, followed by a girl with tangled brown hair and frightened eyes. She was small for her age, whatever that truly was, and her dress was tattered and dirty. Her eyes darted fearfully between the two men. "Stand up straight," Reeves ordered. "Show Mr. Morgan here what a good worker you'd be." The girl struggled to her feet, her legs clearly cramped from being confined. She kept her eyes downcast, but Elijah could see the dried tears on her dirt-smudged face. Without hesitation, Elijah pulled out his money pouch. $50, you said. Reeves nodded eagerly. Best investment you'll make. No back talk, works hard, costs nothing but scraps to feed. Elijah counted out the money, his jaw clenched tight. The girl trembled visibly, and he fought to keep his own hands steady. What's your name? He asked her gently. Sarah, she whispered, so quietly he barely heard her. Well, Sarah, Elijah said, gather whatever belongings you have. You're coming with me. As Sarah collected a small bundle from inside the barrel, Reeves counted his money with a satisfied smirk. She's all yours now, Morgan. Do whatever you want with her. Elijah stepped close to Reeves, his voice barely audible. If I ever hear of you bringing merchandise like this through Redemption Creek again, they'll find pieces of you scattered from here to the territory line. Understood? Reeves' smile faltered at the cold fury in Elijah's eyes. Walking back to his wagon, Elijah helped Sarah climb up onto the seat. The girl flinched at his touch, and his heart ached at the fear in her eyes. Sarah, he said as he took the reins, I'm not what that man thinks I am. I'm taking you to my home, but only until we can find your family or a proper place for you to go. You're not property, and you're not a servant. You understand? Sarah stared at him, confusion and disbelief evident in her expression. My pa traded me fair and square, she said, her voice hollow. Said I was more trouble than worth. No father has the right to trade his child, Elijah replied firmly. And no man has the right to buy one. What I did back there was the only way I could think to help you. As they left town, Sarah sat rigid beside him, clearly unconvinced of his intentions. Elijah didn't push further conversation. Trust would take time and proof that his words matched his actions. The afternoon sun beat down as they traveled the dusty road toward Elijah's homestead. Two strangers bound together by a transaction that would change both their lives forever. The first days at Elijah Morgan's homestead passed in uneasy silence. Sarah moved like a shadow through the small cabin, instinctively taking on chores, sweeping the rough wooden floors, washing dishes, gathering eggs from the handful of chickens that scratched in the yard. Whenever Elijah entered a room, she would freeze, eyes downcast, waiting for orders or worse. You don't need to work yourself to the bone, Elijah told her on the third morning, as he found her mending one of his shirts before dawn had fully broken. There's no debt to pay here. Sarah's fingers stilled, but her eyes remained fixed on the fabric in her hands. My pa always said idle hands invite the devil's work, she murmured. There's truth in that, Elijah acknowledged, but there's also time for rest, and for being a child. The girl's eyes flickered up momentarily, revealing confusion before returning to her task. I ain't been a child since May died 3 winters ago. Elijah sighed, settling into a chair across from her. The early morning light caught the dust particles dancing in the air between them. How old are you really, Sarah? Reeves said 14. Or 15, but ... I'm 13, she replied. 14 come December, if the counting my ma taught me is right. 13. Even younger than he'd feared. Anger at her father surged through him again, but he kept his expression neutral, not wanting to frighten her. Sarah, I need to be clear about something, he said carefully. I've sent word to the sheriff in the county seat about Reeves. What he did, what your father did, it isn't right. It might not even be legal, though the law out here can be flexible. He chose his words deliberately. I want you to understand that you're not bound to stay here. You're not my property or my servant. Sarah's fingers tightened on the shirt. Where would I go? She asked, her voice barely audible. Pa made it clear enough he don't want me back. Said trading me was better than watching another mouth go hungry. Were there other children? Brothers or sisters? Sarah nodded. 4 younger ones, 2 boys, 2 girls. Pa said girls are an expense, but at least the boys will be worth something when they're grown. The casual cruelty of the statement hung in the air between them. Elijah had encountered such attitudes before, children viewed as nothing more than additional labor or burdens, particularly daughters. It was a harsh reality of frontier life, where survival often trumped tenderness. "Well," Elijah said finally, "until we figure something out, you have a place here. There's the small room off the kitchen. It's not much, but it's yours. And there are proper meals, not scraps." For the first time, Sarah looked directly at him, searching his face for deception. "Why are you being kind? What do you want from me?" The question struck Elijah like a physical blow. "Not everyone wants something in return for basic decency, Sarah." "In my experience, they do," she replied with a wisdom far beyond her years. Elijah stood, needing to busy himself. "I lost my wife 6 years ago," he said as he moved to stoke the fire. "Catherine, she was." He paused, memories washing over him. She believed in helping those who needed it. Said it was the only way to make sense of the harshness of this life. Sarah seemed to consider this. "Were there children?" she asked cautiously. "Between you and your wife?" "No," Elijah admitted, the old pain surfacing briefly. "We tried, it wasn't meant to be." An awkward silence fell, broken only by the crackling of the freshly stoked fire. Elijah cleared his throat. "I'll be clearing the north field today. There's bread and preserves for your midday meal. Don't feel obliged to do more than you're comfortable with." As days turned to weeks, a tentative routine developed. Sarah gradually spent more time in Elijah's presence without the constant tension that had initially characterized her demeanor. She began asking questions about the homestead, how long he had lived there, what crops he grew, how he had learned to build the additions to the original cabin. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Sarah broke a comfortable silence. "My ma would have liked this view," she said softly. "She always said God painted the sky pretty to make up for how hard the ground could be." Elijah nodded. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Sarah confirmed. "Taught me my letters and numbers before she passed. Said education was the one thing nobody could take from me." She paused, picking at a loose thread on her dress, one of Catherine's old ones that Elijah had found in a trunk and offered to her. "Guess she didn't reckon on Pa having other ideas." "Do you miss them, your family?" Elijah asked carefully. Sarah considered the question, her young face serious in the fading light. "I miss my brothers and sisters. I worry about them. The little ones, especially Ella, she's only 4 and sickly." Her expression hardened slightly. "Pa, I don't know. He wasn't always like he became. After May died, something in him just broke, started drinking more, talking less. Some days he'd look right through us like we weren't even there." Elijah understood grief's power to transform. He had walked that dangerous path himself after Catherine died, though he'd pulled back before it consumed him entirely. "People can get lost in their pain," he said. "Doesn't make what he did right." "No," Sarah agreed, "it don't." As August gave way to September, signs of Sarah's increasing comfort appeared. She began humming quietly while working in the garden. She expressed preferences about foods and tasks. She left her small room's door ajar at night, rather than closed tight and barricaded with the room's single chair, as she had done initially. One morning, Elijah found her examining the bookshelf where he kept the few volumes he owned, Catherine's Bible, a book of poetry she had cherished, a manual on agriculture, and a dog-eared copy of Robinson Crusoe. "You're welcome to read any of them," he offered, causing her to jump slightly. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." "I can read some," Sarah said, "but I'm slow at it. Ma only had time to teach me the basics before ... double quotes," she trailed off. "I could help if you'd like," Elijah suggested. In the evenings, after chores, the look of genuine surprise and cautious hope on Sarah's face made something twist in Elijah's chest. "You do that? Teach me more reading." "Of course," he said. "Knowledge is freedom, in its way." That evening, they began what would become a nightly ritual. Seated at the kitchen table with a lamp between them, Elijah patiently guided Sarah through the pages of Robinson Crusoe. Her determination was evident in the furrow of her brow as she sounded out difficult words, and her quiet pride when she successfully navigated a complex passage warmed something long cold within him. He was alone for so long, Sarah remarked. One night, referring to Crusoe, didn't it drive him mad? People can endure more than you might think, Elijah replied. Especially when they have purpose. Sarah considered this. What's your purpose, Mr. Morgan? She asked, and then quickly added, if it ain't too forward to ask. Elijah smiled at her growing confidence. Not too forward at all. And I think after all this time, you might call me Elijah. He thought about her question. For a long while after Catherine died, I didn't have much purpose beyond surviving each day. The farm kept me busy, gave me reason to get up each morning. But purpose? He shook his head. I'm not sure I had one until recently. And now? Sarah prompted. Elijah met her curious gaze. Now I'm helping a young lady learn to read properly. Seems purpose enough for the time being. The small smile that curved Sarah's lips was like the first green shoot after a long winter, tentative but full of promise. The crisp October air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves as Elijah loaded the wagon for their monthly trip to town. These excursions had become more frequent since Sarah's arrival. There were growing girls' needs to consider. After all, today's journey held particular significance. It would be Sarah's first return to Redemption Creek since the day Elijah had found her in Reeves' barrel. You sure you want to come along? Elijah asked as Sarah emerged from the cabin. Wearing her best dress, another of Catherine's that had been carefully altered to fit her smaller frame. I can handle the trading on my own if you'd prefer to stay here. Sarah squared her shoulders, a gesture Elijah had come to recognize as her gathering courage. I need to go, she said simply. Can't hide forever. Elijah nodded, understanding her unspoken fears. In the 2 months since her arrival, Sarah had transformed from a frightened, withdrawn child into a more confident young person. Her nightmares had decreased, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. He still sometimes heard her crying softly in the night, but when morning came, she faced each day with quiet determination, thought the journey to town passed with Sarah pointing out changes in the landscape since her arrival, trees now aflame with autumn colors, fields harvested and lying fallow, the occasional deer glimpsed at the forest edge. Her observations revealed an attentive mind, one that had flourished with encouragement and safety. As they approached Redemption Creek, Sarah fell silent, her hands fidgeting with the fabric of her dress. Remember, Elijah said gently, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You did nothing wrong. People will talk, she murmured. They always do. Let them, Elijah replied with more confidence than he felt. He had considered the gossip they might face. A single man living with a young girl, regardless of the circumstances, would inevitably raise eyebrows. But he had developed a plan during the week since bringing Sarah home. The town appeared much as it had the day they'd met, dusty, bustling with the modest commerce of a frontier settlement. Several faces turned toward their wagon as they rolled down the main street, curious glances quickly giving way to whispered conversations behind hands. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, a small building adjacent to the jail. Sheriff Thomas Miller was a fair-minded man who had served the county for nearly a decade. Elijah had sent him a letter explaining Sarah's situation shortly after bringing her to the homestead. Morgan, Miller greeted them, rising from behind his desk. His eyes moved to Sarah, assessing but not unkind. And this must be the young lady you wrote about. Sarah offered a small curtsy, her eyes downcast. Any word on Reeves? Elijah asked, getting straight to business. Miller's expression darkened. Caught up with him near the territorial border. He won't be trading in people anymore, or anything else. At Elijah's questioning look, he added, tried to draw on my deputy when we confronted him. Didn't end well for him. Elijah nodded, feeling no remorse for the man's fate. And word of Sarah's father? Nothing concrete, Miller admitted. Descriptions match a man named Henry Colton from eastern Tennessee. Has a reputation for drinking and making poor decisions. Haven't been able to locate him specifically. Sarah's shoulders tensed at the mention of her father, though she remained silent. Sheriff, Elijah said, I've come to formalize Sarah's situation. I'd like to file guardianship papers. Sarah's head snapped up, surprise evident in her wide eyes. Miller studied them both carefully. That's a significant responsibility, Morgan. You sure about this? I am, Elijah confirmed. Sarah deserves stability and protection under the law. Without legal guardianship, her position remains vulnerable. The sheriff nodded slowly. Judge Wilson will be through next week. You can present your case then. He turned to Sarah. That suit you, Miss Colton? Being under Mr. Morgan's guardianship? Sarah glanced at Elijah, then back to the sheriff. Yes, sir, she said quietly. He's been kind, more than kind. That matches what I've heard, Miller said. Mrs. Peterson from the Church Society called on you last month, didn't she? Said you seemed well settled. Elijah had almost forgotten the visit, a supposedly casual social call that he recognized as the community's way of checking on Sarah's welfare. Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, had been gracious but observant, her eyes missing nothing as she took tea with them. We'll return for the judge's visit, Elijah promised, placing a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder. Thank you, Sheriff. Their next stop was Dawson's General Store. As they entered, conversations halted momentarily before resuming at a lower volume. Samuel Dawson greeted them warmly enough, though his curious gaze lingered on Sarah. Mr. Morgan, Miss. He trailed off, clearly fishing for information. Sarah Colton, Elijah supplied. My ward. The designation seemed to satisfy something in Dawson, who nodded and turned to business. What can I help you with today? As Elijah listed their needs, Sarah wandered toward a display of fabric bolts, her fingers lightly touching a piece of blue calico. That would make a fine dress for a young lady, came a female voice, causing Sarah to withdraw her hand quickly. Martha Wilson, the schoolteacher, stood nearby, her kind face wrinkled in a smile. You must be the girl staying with Mr. Morgan. I'm Miss Wilson. Sarah Colton, ma'am, Sarah replied, remembering her manners. Do you enjoy learning, Sarah? Miss Wilson asked conversationally. Sarah's face brightened slightly. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Morgan's been teaching me to read better. We're halfway through Robinson Crusoe now. Is that so? Miss Wilson's eyebrows rose in approval. Perhaps you might consider joining us at the schoolhouse. We have students of various ages and abilities. The suggestion caught Sarah off guard. She glanced toward Elijah, who was concluding his business with Dawson. I don't know if that would be proper. Sarah stammered. With my situation being what it is. Miss Wilson's expression softened. Education is proper for every child, regardless of circumstances. Think about it. She lowered her voice. And for what it's worth, any girl who can discuss Robinson Crusoe already has a head start on half my students. By the time they left the store, laden with supplies, Sarah seemed both exhausted and exhilarated by the social interactions. As they loaded the wagon, Elijah noticed her repeatedly glancing toward the small whitewashed schoolhouse at the end of the street. Miss Wilson invited me to attend school, she blurted as they prepared to depart. Said it would be proper, despite everything. Elijah considered this development. Would you like that, to go to school? I don't know, Sarah admitted. Never been to a proper school before. Might be nice to learn more than what Ma had time to teach me. She hesitated. But the farm, there's work to be done, and I should earn my keep. Sarah, Elijah said firmly, you're a child first, a farm helper second. If you want to attend school, we'll make it happen. The hope that dawned on her face was answer enough. Their return journey was quiet, both lost in thoughts about the day's events. As the homestead came into view, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, Sarah finally broke the silence. Did you mean it? About becoming my guardian legal-like? I did, Elijah confirmed. if that's what you want." Sarah was quiet for another moment before asking, "Why?" "You don't owe me nothing." Elijah guided the horses into the yard before answering. "When Catherine died, I thought the chance for family died with her," he said carefully. "I never expected." He paused, searching for the right words. "You deserve a home, Sarah, a real one with someone who cares what happens to you. I find I care very much." Sarah blinked rapidly, looking away. "What if my pa comes looking for me? Or if the judge says no? Then we'll face those challenges together," Elijah promised. "But your father sold his right to determine your future, as far as I'm concerned. And the judge will see we've built something worth preserving here." As they unloaded the wagon, Sarah moved with a new lightness, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That evening, as they sat for their regular reading session, she hesitated before opening the book. "If I go to school," she said, "would we still do this, our reading together?" "Of course," Elijah assured her. "This time is important to me too." Sarah smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed her face. "Good," she said simply, and opened the book to where they had left off, her finger carefully tracing beneath the words as she began to read aloud about Crusoe's continuing adventures on his island, no longer quite so alone. The November morning dawned cold and clear as Elijah and Sarah prepared for their journey to town. Judge Wilson had arrived for his circuit court sessions, and today would determine Sarah's legal future. They had spent the previous evening reviewing what to expect, but Elijah could see the anxiety etched on Sarah's face as she pinned her hair neatly beneath her bonnet. "Remember," he said gently, "just answer truthfully. Judge Wilson is fair-minded." Sarah nodded, smoothing down her dress, a new one made from the blue calico she had admired in Dawson's store. The fabric had been Elijah's surprise gift after their last trip to town, and Sarah had worked diligently to sew it properly, with some guidance from Mrs. Peterson, who had become a regular visitor to their homestead. "What if he says no?" Sarah asked, voicing the fear that had clearly been troubling her. "What if he makes me go back to Pa?" Elijah knelt to be at her eye level, something he found himself doing less frequently as she stood taller with each passing week. "I won't let that happen," he promised. "Sheriff Miller has found no evidence your father is even looking for you. But if the worst occurs, there are options. Mrs. Peterson has already offered to petition for guardianship herself if needed." This was true. The minister's wife had become unexpectedly supportive, bringing books for Sarah and inviting her to join the church's sewing circle. Elijah suspected the woman's initial skepticism had transformed to genuine concern once she saw the situation firsthand. The ride to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Redemption Creek, Sarah straightened her shoulders, that familiar gesture of gathering courage that always made Elijah's heart ache a little. The town's small courthouse was already busy when they arrived. Judge Wilson conducted official business only quarterly when his circuit brought him to Redemption Creek, so citizens with legal matters had gathered in anticipation. Sheriff Miller nodded to them as they entered, gesturing toward seats near the front. "Morgan and the Colton girl are here for the guardianship petition," he informed the court clerk, who made a notation in his ledger. They waited nearly 2 hours as the judge addressed property disputes, a theft case, and various other matters. Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, though Elijah could feel the tension radiating from her small frame. Several townspeople nodded politely as they passed, curiosity evident in their glances, but largely free of the judgment Elijah had feared. Finally, the clerk called their names. Elijah and Sarah approached the judge's bench, standing side by side. As Sheriff Miller presented the case, "Your Honor, this is the guardianship matter I mentioned in my correspondence. Elijah Morgan petitioning for legal guardianship of Sarah Colton, age 13. Judge Wilson was an imposing figure with a thick white beard and piercing eyes that seemed to look straight through pretense. He studied the papers before him, then looked up at Sarah. "Young lady," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I understand. You came to Mr. Morgan's care under unusual circumstances. Sheriff Miller has provided details, but I'd like to hear from you directly. Are you being treated well in Mr. Morgan's home? Sarah's voice was soft but steady. Yes, Your Honor, very well. And it's your wish to remain there, under his guardianship? Yes, sir, she affirmed. Mr. Morgan, Elijah, he's teaching me reading. And figures. I've started attending school 3 days a week now, too. Miss Wilson says I'm catching up quick. The judge nodded, turning his attention to Elijah. Mr. Morgan, guardianship of a child is a serious responsibility. You understand you would be legally obligated to provide for her education, physical well-being, and moral guidance until she reaches the age of 18. I do, Your Honor, Elijah replied. I'm prepared for that responsibility. Your reputation in this community speaks well of you, the judge noted. Sheriff Miller and Minister Peterson have both submitted statements of support. He paused, reviewing another document. However, there is the matter of the girl's father. While his actions were reprehensible, he retains legal rights unless formally terminated. Elijah felt Sarah tense beside him. Has there been any communication from the father? Judge Wilson asked. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. No, Your Honor. My inquiries to the Tennessee authorities confirm a Henry Colton matching the description exists, but he appears to have left that region. There's been no indication he's seeking the return of his daughter. The judge frowned, considering this information. Miss Colton, when did you last see your father? Sarah swallowed hard. The day he traded me to Mr. Reeves, sir. That was early. July of this year. And did he indicate any intention to reclaim you later? Sarah shook her head. No, sir, he said. Her voice faltered slightly. He said he was washing his hands of me. That I was more trouble than I was worth with my mama gone. Something in the judge's expression softened. I see. He turned back to his papers, making several notations. The courtroom remained silent as he deliberated, the only sound the scratching of his pen and the occasional cough from the spectators. Finally, Judge Wilson looked up. In the matter of guardianship for Sarah Colton, I find compelling evidence that her father has abandoned his parental responsibilities through actions that place the child at significant risk of harm, while permanent termination of parental rights would require additional proceedings. I am granting temporary legal guardianship to Elijah Morgan for a period of 1 year. Elijah felt Sarah's small hand slip into his, squeezing tightly. At the conclusion of that year, the judge continued, assuming no legitimate claim is made by the father and satisfactory reports are received regarding the child's welfare, permanent guardianship may be granted. Mr. Morgan, you will file quarterly reports with Sheriff Miller regarding the child's education, health, and general well-being. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, Elijah said, relief evident in his voice. The judge nodded. Miss Colton, you appear to have found a good home here. I expect to hear excellent reports of your progress in school. Yes, sir, Sarah replied, a tremulous smile forming on her lips. As they exited the courthouse, several townspeople approached to offer congratulations. Miss Wilson promised to bring additional books for Sarah's continued education. Mrs. Peterson invited them both to the church's Thanksgiving gathering the following week. Even Samuel Dawson expressed his approval, offering Sarah a piece of candy from the jar on his store counter. When they stopped to purchase supplies before heading home, the air held the sharp promise of snow as they loaded the wagon for the return journey. Sarah seemed transformed, her movements lighter, her face animated as she chattered about school and the books Miss Wilson had recommended. Does this mean I can call you my guardian now, official-like? She asked as they set off toward home. It does, Elijah confirmed. Though we still need to be mindful, there's that 1-year probation period. Sarah nodded seriously. I'll be extra good. Won't give the judge any reason to change his mind. Elijah smiled. Just be yourself, Sarah. That's more than good enough. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to the momentous changes of the day. As the homestead came into view, Sarah spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "When my pa put me in that barrel," she said slowly, "I thought it was the worst day of my life. I was so scared and angry." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But if he hadn't done that terrible thing, I wouldn't have found you. Wouldn't have found this home." Elijah considered her words carefully. "Sometimes good things can come from bad beginnings," he agreed. "Though that doesn't make what he did right." "No," Sarah acknowledged. "But it makes what happened after better, knowing something good came of it." She looked up at him, her eyes clear and direct. "Thank you for buying that barrel, Elijah." The simple gratitude in her voice moved him deeply. "Thank you for being the strongest person I know, Sarah Colton," he replied as they reached the homestead. The first few snowflakes began to fall, dusting the ground with white. Together, they unloaded the wagon and prepared for the evening ahead, a simple meal, their nightly reading session, planning for the Thanksgiving celebration to come. No longer merely a man and a girl thrown together by circumstance, but a family, forged through choice and care and the quiet courage to begin again. In the small wooden chest beside his bed, Elijah had placed the guardianship papers signed by Judge Wilson. They represented not just legal protection for Sarah, but a new chapter for them, both one written not in whiskey trades and desperation, but in shared meals, reading lessons, and the steady building of trust. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the harsh edges of the world in gentle white, promising that even the darkest seasons eventually yield to new beginnings.